Before we begin this episode, a content warning. Father will be discussing topics of an adult nature and speaking frankly about issues touching on the 6th and 9th commandment. While these are important issues and Catholics must be aware of the morality of these topics and not just turn a blind eye to them, this episode would not be suitable for young children, and parents are encouraged to listen to this episode before prudentially judging whether their older children should listen along with them. We'll pause here for a few moments before beginning. Welcome back to the SSPX podcast. In this 6th entry in our ongoing Digital Danger series, we'll continue our discussion of pornography with a special emphasis on its destructive effects. Exposure to it, especially at a young age, can leave an imprint on the mind that remains for years. Repeated exposure often leads to addiction, which is not easily overcome. Although all things are possible with God's grace, those who have been exposed to this harmful material must not only have recourse to the sacraments, but take strong proactive steps to eliminate future opportunities to view this sinful material. Parents must be especially vigilant to ensure that unprotected smartphones and other electronic devices are not left unattended, lest the children entrusted to their care fall victim to this widespread evil. The effects of this material and what we as Catholics can do to protect ourselves and our children will be addressed by Father Jonathan Kopec on this 6th episode of Digital Dangers.
Welcome back, Father, to our next episode of Digital Dangers. The last episode, we talked a lot about pornography and it being the greatest danger in the digital world. We've talked about a lot of other dangers, but we didn't get through the topic entirely. And so maybe to start this one before we move on to a few other aspects of it, and then concluding with some guidelines of what can be done. To recap, most of our audience obviously understands the gravest part of pornography, that it's a mortal sin and kills the life, grace, and the soul. But there are other aspects to the crisis and gravity of pornography. So maybe you could refresh our memories, just go over what we've talked about already concerning pornography.
Okay. Yeah, it really is. It really is the great evil today. It's just it perfectly finds the weakness of our age and exploits it in every possible way. And it's just it's a slave making machine. And it is so universal. So, right. So what we hit upon last time was that, yes, in addition to the most serious evil as far as pornography goes, it being a mortal sin, we talked about how, well, even kind of prior to that, let's say in time or nature, it's a neurological problem. It's an addiction that affects our brain, our nervous system, our emotions, because that's tied into the regulation of our hormones and things like that. It affects really just the wiring of a person's sexual nature, for good or for evil. For evil because it always has a disordered connotation. No matter what, it's intrinsic to it. And so it's not too much to say it's like brain damage. It causes a damage on a physical level, even because it's rewiring us in a way that we're not actually ordered to be wired. And so therefore it really can be called a neurological damage. And because it's so impacting, this is the fundamental reason why it's such a temptation. It's not just that there are so many bad people out there. It's really not so much the case. It's just that this particular temptation has a particularly strong pull on our nature, and it's particularly good at hooking our nature in, and it works over and over and over again. So it's an extremely difficult temptation, especially once it's begun at all, much less to resist in the first place. And I feel like we can't overemphasize that, because I think there are many people, and certainly I being one of them at one point in my life, just being like, no, it couldn't possibly be, all that bad, or there can't possibly be. But it's like, no, it's quasi-universal. It extends pretty much as far as any smartphone does. And every human being is affected by it. Like we talked about last time, there's sort of a passive effect as far as women go. But every man is in some way affected by it, even just because of the fact that our culture is becoming increasingly pornographic. And then our children are certainly being affected by it by growing up in this pornographic culture. Like we kind of talked about it, like the barriers keep being broken down even before they even have a chance to know one way or another. And what that means is that, I mean, this reality of increased abuse and things like that, it's only going to get worse, for certain, because nothing's really being done to address the problem. And the children are the ones that are being impacted the most. Well, what's the most likely outcome out of this particular type of sexual abuse? It's continued abuse then, person. So it's not a pretty picture that we're up against, I guess, was our conclusion. It's universal. It's extremely damaging. It's very addictive. It's as coexistent as a smartphone or any connection to the internet, and it's affecting all of us in one way or another. And because it's a neurological thing, it simply can't be overcome just by really wanting to, or really praying about it. So.
Okay.
I guess that's the recap as far as I remember, unless you had more than...
No, well, I mean, so jumping ahead a little bit, because the problem is so far-reaching, so there's the moral problem, as you point out, the neurological problem, the way it affects the memory, the way it affects, one's vision of the world and other people. It seems like the remedy then, or remedies would also have to be... multifaceted, right?
Kind of holistic, I guess.
Holistic, and you don't obviously at the highest level, going to confession or like directly addressing the moral side is the most important part. But in light of everything you said, that's clearly not. You don't want to make it sound like, well, that's not enough.
Right. It's tough to use the phrase "not enough" when it comes to the sacraments and God's grace. But here's the reality, and I think it's a good point. God does not force our will, and he doesn't force our salvation. And so even though his grace is perfectly sufficient, he won't push us one smidgen, past what we're disposed or what we're allowing him to do, basically, as far as our free choice goes. He does not control our will. Otherwise, there wouldn't be really a heaven, is what it comes down to. So when it comes to a sin like this, an addiction, let's say, or even something that's liable to be an addiction, we can say, in a sense, that the sacraments are not enough if we are not disposing ourselves to use the grace of those sacraments. So if someone is addicted to drugs or alcohol and they still have as much substance in their room that would do the trick, well, they can go say as many rosaries as they want and go to confession and receive Holy Communion, all the things, but they're not disposing themselves to cooperate with that grace because they're continuing to live in a state of near occasion of sin. So, God's not going to force their will. So in a sense, we can say not enough, not because there's something lacking in grace itself, especially, sacramental grace, but because there's something lacking in our dispositions. We get tricked into thinking that, well, surely if I pray and sacrifice then surely God will help me. But it's like, well, you might have to do something more. And that's I think that's what we need to talk about. Is what more do we have to do?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe not to again, as you say, it can't be overemphasized, but something, we go through a lot of these cuts. So if I repeat things, it's for the sake of maybe making sure that this gets either in one of the cuts or to reinforce it. But I think you said something that is perhaps shocking to a lot of people, which is, this kind of thing, even after it's overcome to a certain extent, can be later an impediment even to a vocation, or this kind of, the damage can be that long lasting, right? Is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there is some kind of, this has potentially long-term effects.
Yeah, and I would even say, a little bit more than potentially. I think no matter what, the damage done will always be in some way there. Now,
so that's one part that I think has to be really, carved into stone, because I think that helps. Yeah. What I was trying to convey with the confession question is, the damages, sort of the images that are in the memory, those things don't always, again, usually, well, how does one say this prudently, Father?
Right.
I leave it to you. Theologically, it's not as simple as, okay, confession is not going to just wipe clean your memory,
Right.
wipe all the effects of sin in every way all the time.
Right.
So,
No, that's for sure the case. So I mean, there's two things to what you're saying there. One is that our fallen human nature is never suddenly created, never recreated integral while we're on Earth. We're always going to have fallen human nature. We're always going to have the wounds of concupiscence. So it says in that degree, the struggle will never stop.
Okay.
Let's say, especially for men, the struggle will that for many men, I would say their sanctification will be achieved in this particular struggle, just because it's in their nature, let's say. But I mean that in a sense for every human being, our sanctification, our salvation will be found in overcoming our particular weaknesses, let's say, with God's grace, letting him overcome us rather, or our weaknesses. But the other, so that's one side, is our fallen human nature never goes away. But the other side of it, like you were saying, is that when it comes to our memory, and when it comes to, let's say, our neurological pathways, and the connections between these things, grace, short of a miracle, literally short of a miracle, is not going to change our physical makeup. It's not going to change our neurological wiring
for any addiction,
for anything, for any sort of addiction or any sort of memory, good or bad. Memory is a physical thing.
Sure.
It is. It's a once. Yeah. Well, we're not going to get into the psychology of the soul and everything like that. But quite frankly, there's a reason why if you bang your head on a wall, you forget things.
Right.
It's because you've done a little bit of damage to your brain, physical things. So the memories and the habits, the neurological and let's say even sexual habits that are formed by the use of pornography in one way or another are going to last. Now, the difference is this, as far as, is it hopeless or not?
Right.
The difference, I mean, I think it's the most easiest way to explain it would just be to say, okay, an alcoholic will always, in a sense, be an alcoholic. Like his nervous system will be so rewired as to always want, so to speak, more alcohol than what's reasonable. And because his capacity, his level for enjoyment, all that sort of thing, the bar will be raised so high by continued use that it won't feel normal to him until it's over the end. That will always be there, says most experts when it comes to alcoholism. But the difference is that the alcoholic, once he faces his problem and gets over it, he can live a perfectly happy life and save his soul on top of it, but he'll know I can't have another drink. And not only can I not have another drink, but these are the places and the circumstances that I need to stay away from, because he accepts in humility, if I go in there, that's going to be beyond my ability to say no.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of thing. Someone who's by their own fault or not, ended up in this state of what, you could call it dependency, you can call it sexual disorder. And what I mean by that, I guess, it's just to make that clear once and for all, because I've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, is that, there are of course exceptions, but basically someone's first real exposure to sexuality is going to mark them more or less for the rest of their life. And what I mean by that is, like when we're talking about that whole neurological pathway thing, the younger we are, the more just unformed and everything like that. Well, all of a sudden you introduce into that very unformed brain, connected to the whole nervous system and the different hormones and things like that, a very impacting experience, because they're too young to understand, and all of the changes in the body that come along with sexual excitation. And what you end up with is basically a first wire, a first real groove in this whole realm, that is going to be, for all practical purposes, kind of a foundational groove. And this is, we're kind of getting into the realm of, what a psychotherapist would call like the basis for trauma. Like the younger we are, something very impactful happens. It kind of creates this groove in us that always lights up when we come into similar circumstances. That's why someone can have a phobia of a cat, because when it was 2 years old, some cat clawed its eyes out and all the thing. And ever since then, it has this memory that's linked to this particular thing, and it flares up every time. So it's that all these sort of things are connected. So unfortunately, someone, this is also why sexual abuse from an actual person is so damaging, is because it can mark a child's sexuality. in many different ways. They could grow up thinking this is all they're good for, or this is the only particular type of sexuality there is, or they'll have a certain attraction to a particular type of sexuality, even if it's completely disordered, because this is what made its first impact on it. Well, pornography, like I mentioned the last time, it does the same exact thing. You know, a child can come across homosexual pornography, and it could have such a strong impact on them. And maybe the first thing that happens is they just, are overwhelmed by the curiosity of it all and continue to watch and continue to go back, and then it grows and grows and grows with shame and secrecy, working together to keep it under wraps. And all of a sudden you have a young child, even someone as young as 7 or 8 years old, that's legitimately addicted to something like this, but it's completely disordered. And they might then, God willing, eventually talk to someone about it. Their parents help them with it. They realize what's wrong. As they get older, they learn more about God's creation and design of our sexual nature. And then they realize by the time, let's say they're 15, 16, 17, oh, that's terrible. I can't have an attraction for someone who's the same sex as I. And yet this is where there comes sort of like this, there's been a rewiring of their nature, so to speak, where they can't help it. Because that's what impacted them so deeply. And that sort of thing, again, just like the alcoholic, just like the drug addict, just like any sort of pornography usage, that in some way they're going to limp on that one, probably for the rest of their life. But again, just like the alcoholic, it doesn't mean that they're inevitably going to lose their soul. Obviously not, because then that would definitely render grace meaningless. So that we throw that one out the window completely. Nor does it mean that they can't live a fulfilled life in some vocation or other. But it does mean, depending on the degree and depending on how much they've been able to get over it, and by get over it, I literally just mean someone can experience a temptation without acting on it. And that's what virtue is. I mean, that's really what we're all going for. It's not that we don't have temptation. It's that we can suffer temptation, even a strongly disordered inclination, and not act on it, and that's virtue. At the end of the day, distinctions involved, but so someone can not only like I said, live a fulfilling life, but possibly to the degree that how far in to an addiction were they, how far past it did they get, how on top of it are they, to those questions for an individual, those are the questions that are going to be asked as far as like, okay, well, can I pursue a vocation? Can I reasonably pursue a relationship, whatever it is. And those are legitimate questions, unfortunately, today. And that's going to be just case by case. Because, it's kind of like anything else. Someone can be so physically damaged that they cannot pursue a religious vocation or even a vocation to marriage because they're just incapable of fulfilling the requirements of that duty of state. And that could be just because they got, hit by a car or something like that, something completely outside of their, but we all have to bear the wounds that, we've suffered. And so it's the same thing here. So yes, for sure. To finally answer your question, for sure, something like this, especially the younger it starts and the more deeply it goes, for sure that can impact the possibility of someone being able to reasonably pursue a religious vocation. But I don't want that statement to mean complete hopelessness. Like it's going to be a case by case in that sort of thing. So let's get to the hope here in a second, but one further clarification just before we leave this part behind, because I do think it's in the digital safety book, which we plan on making available to everyone, at least as part of this. You give the example, just another aspect I think for people to keep in mind when we talk about the impact on adolescence or when we talk about future vocations and relationships. I think the booklet says something like, it's possible or probably even happened that certain vocations are lost through others' negligence, meaning if there is unfiltered access or there is a way to discover pornography and someone stumbles on it and then develops a dependency, addiction, whatever, that that just, I guess, to emphasize the kind of fire that you're playing with others also sometimes, just by leaving things unfiltered or leaving if there's something that for a priest is a very difficult thing to end the day with, it's this constantly frustrating reality of the negligence of, I mean, more often than not, parents. Sometimes it's just older siblings, but it's just, I mean, a fellow priest of mine, we were having a conversation about this, and he was saying, you know, no one in their right mind, no good parent would leave, you know, a loaded gun sitting in the living room. Everyone would just be like, no, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Because, you know, obviously very bad things can happen and have happened from these sort of, you know, from accidents like that. To leave a smartphone that's especially unfiltered and especially unlocked, and usually they're locked, but I mean, I think if anyone's paid attention, their 3-year-old can figure out that 6-digit combination very quickly, and much less their 13-year-old. You know, but to have an unfiltered, unsupervised smartphone that's available for their child is so much worse than leaving a loaded gun in the living room. So much worse. Because maybe this will sound too extreme, but it would be better for a terrible accident to happen from a gun going off, even if it means the loss of that life, if that life is in the state of grace, than the loss of a soul or the loss of a vocation or the loss of multiple souls that can happen from the negligence of a device that a child can access and stumble into something that can mean a major change for the rest of his life. It's so much worse. Yeah, and unfortunately it happens all too often. And I think maybe this is a good thing. One of the reasons it happens are our parents are very quickly, you know, to presume like their kid wouldn't do that. And I know you and I have been talking about, we're going to talk more about this in a future episode, I think, but it might as well mention it here. It's definitely a faulty reasoning to just say, you know, my child wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that in our family. We're traditional Catholics, for goodness sake. It's why can't we say that is because we're not talking about something that's reasonably controlled by virtue, especially the virtue of an 8, 9, 10, 17-year-old. We're talking about something that is disproportionate to their ability on a natural level. So to say that, no, my child wouldn't do that, you're overestimating, you know, the good quality of your child, which is unfair to him, and you're underestimating the wounds of his fallen human nature, which are going to be 100% open to this sort of thing. And I mentioned in the last episode the story of that, you know, they found their son, and I think they was, you know, 8 or 9 years old, and just I couldn't stop. I wanted to, but I couldn't stop, and that. All that means is that he was completely overloaded on the mental level, and it doesn't mean he was a bad kid. But yeah, so thank you for pulling that point out again, because it can't be overemphasized. Please, parents, please, can't leave anything, not just unlocked, but unfiltered, unmonitored, all the things. And simple number combination passwords are just not enough. They're not even close.
Okay. That's sobering, but helpful information. And I think we're going to delve into, in a future episode, some of the practical aspects on the tech side of that. But
filtering and accountability and settings and things like that.
What kind of safeguards are available? How to even do that to an extent. Right. So for now, though, I mean, that can all be pretty heavy. And yes, I think there's probably some people who will feel or hear that like, well, that's just, you know, insurmountable then, or that maybe the temptation to despair is like, well, then it's just so, it's just so impossible and so ubiquitous that what am I going to do? But there are things practically we can do. So it's one thing to say, pornography cannot be overcome by willpower and prayer alone. Certainly that is though part of the answer. So walk us through what can be done.
Okay.
To give reasonable hope to those who at least see some of the gravity of the bigger picture.
Sure. Okay. We'll do this. I think it might make sense to kind of go from a couple different perspectives, because it's going to be different from, you know, from a parent's perspective as it is from someone who's, you know, knee deep in an addiction, let's say. So I think probably it would make sense to just start from there. So let's say most extreme case. And what do I do? I stumbled on this, or I made my own bad choices, and now I can't stop. Is there any hope for me? The answer is absolutely there's hope, for sure. And that's concretely based in the fact that God's grace can overcome any sin, any temptation, period. So it's absolutely certain that it can be overcome. And by that we mean not that you won't have to struggle.
Yeah.
But that you will be able to continue to struggle, and even to the point of saving your soul through that struggle, for sure.
Okay.
Now, that being said, this can only be overcome if we start with an intense desire to overcome it, which sounds kind of obvious. And yet, quite frankly, that's almost certainly one of the biggest obstacles to overcoming it, because something like this that is physically overloading to our system, it takes away the feeling of motivation, let's say, which it literally mean feeling. So I don't really feel motivated. I don't even feel bad about it anymore. Someone might say, I don't, and if I stop, I'm going to miss it. I know, hypothetically, I know that's wrong. I know that's a sin. It just doesn't feel like a sin anymore. So addiction can have that, that most thorough of an effect. So the first thing that has to happen is there has to be a choice to say, I'm going to do everything I can to get over this. Absolutely anything. And unless that choice is made, if someone's in the throes of an addiction, they're not going to be able to step outside of it until they're willing to make that choice. I'm going to do everything I can. And then step 2 is, or step 1, as far as the practical sense goes after that choice, is there's no other real way for this to start changing except for sobriety, let's say, or complete cessation. Yeah. So as long as you're doing drugs, you're going to continue to be dependent on drugs. Period.
Yeah, there's no halfway house.
There's
here.
no halfway. Yeah, and you see, I looked into them. There's these different programs online. You could watch the series of videos, and you could do these these plans and stuff, and try this and have these goals. It's no. If you have a near occasion of something that's this addicting and you're knee deep in it, you're not gonna get on top of it just by saying, okay, I'm gonna use my phone less. I'm just gonna leave it in the car at night. You got to get rid of it. You got to get to the point where you can say to yourself reasonably, even if I wanted to, I couldn't just pull it out. So that might, because usually what people say at this point, well, Father, I can go to the library, I can go to Walmart. Yes, but you can at least get yourself to the point where, at least here and now, in your own home, in your own car, you can say, even if I wanted to, I couldn't just pull it out. That's step 1. We need to at least be able to be comfortable with that much separation. If that means that, your job is going to suffer, or, you might be able to do your online banking, or, you're not going to be able to check your email, and that's going to affect your schooling, so be it. You'll find a way, I promise. And if you don't, then it'll be better for you not to have a job than not to have a soul. These things have to be faced, because there's no other way except for I can't pull it out even if I wanted to right now. That's why I said the first step has to be this very sincere, I'm going to do whatever it takes, no matter the cost, sort of thing, because it's only from that sort of decision will you make that first very practical step. So the first step is going to be removed from one's life any possible source of temptation, because if use continues, addiction continues. And if the possibility of open access is present, the falling to that addiction is inevitable. That's just how it's going to be. Okay. So after that, it's okay. So you got to make a change. This is the defensive part, let's say. So the enemy's started to scale the fence. Yeah. You're pushing them off by getting rid of the occasion of sin. So choose a device, if you still need some form of communication, which most people do, not necessarily though, if you're a student or something like that, but get a device that can't access impure content. And thank God we are not the only ones that are seeing this as a problem. And there are plenty of people out there, making devices and things like that for this very reason. I mean, I have a whole list of websites and resources, and very few of them have anything to do with Catholicism, much less Christianity. I mean, there's a whole website called Fight the New Drug, and they're completely agnostic. They don't care at all, but they realize that this is a drug that's manipulating the human race. For example. Yeah. So there are definitely phones out there. Thank God, like I said, because 10 years ago there were not. It was very hard to find. There was this moment where flip phones stopped being made. Yeah. And smartphones were just ubiquitous, and it was like, well, I need some way to call people, and there's nothing else. But there are rather. So no excuses. No excuses. Yeah. If you want it, you can get a device that all you can do is talk and text. Yeah. Done. And you'll be happier, I promise. And we'll put resources and things and for folks to be able to look into those sort of things. Anyway, you got to go for, in your life you don't have some sort of digital access. that has open access to everything else. That's the goal. That's the defense. The kind of like the free blocking apps, the cheap, accountability things, they're completely insufficient. They simply cannot keep up with the thousands of videos that are uploaded every day, and the different websites that are constantly being made. Even the best ones that you pay a lot more money for, and we'll talk about those at a later time. Those are very worth having, I think, for the average person. But even those are constantly trying to keep up with newly posted things, and they can't block everything. So, the free things are completely insufficient. Don't even bother. Okay. So that's the defense part, is get to the point where the enemy's off the gate. I can't pull it out of my pocket. I would have to at least do several steps. And by then, hopefully I've come to my senses and backed out. So step 2 then is be on offense. And this is something I think that's often forgotten. I think a lot of people, they say, okay, well, I got it. I paid for Covenant Eyes. I got my phone locked down. I got an accountability partner. I'm good. Like, well, okay, no. If this was a problem, your brain has suffered damage. It's been rewired. But the good news is that your brain continues to be plastic, as we talked about, which means moldable. So your chances are you're not going to be able to completely go back to, the innocence of a child, let's say. But you absolutely can and need to start working against it now. So that means intentionally choosing other things, first of all. So instead, whether that means entertainment, physical and mental activity, just things to bring satisfaction to my life, they need to be intentionally sought and intentionally practiced, because that's what's going to rewire your brain to say, I can find joy in whatever it is, going for a walk or painting a picture, playing music, or spending time with my friends. Whereas up until this point, provided the addiction was actually going very deep, those sort of things will have lost their appeal because it has taken over. So very, very intentional, different things to do. Another part of the offense would be to restart to study, to exercise as well. So mental activity, physical activity, because both of those are going to reset our system, like I said, and that gives us something, kind of like concrete to hold on to, tangible, Then after that is the more kind of like both sort of like an intellectual, mental work that needs to be done. And that's finally when we can get to the spiritual work, believe it or not. It's not just as simple as, well, I'll just start praying. No, so you got to do very practical things first. Defense, get the enemy off the gate. Offense, start intentionally doing things, exercise your mind, exercise your body. And then the last 2 things, like I said, kind of on the more mental level, is someone ought to intentionally practice, changing what their ideal of love is, or their ideal of sexuality. So pornography will make it out to be something completely selfish, something based in me, not something that's sharing, not something that's fruitful. But it'll be selfish. It'll often lead to, disorder or even violence and things like that. Okay, well, to intentionally change our idea of those things and try and match what's in our mind to the reality of God's creation, that's something that needs to be practiced. And that's difficult, and it takes time, and usually that's kind of the realm of some sort of therapy. It's so like, if anyone might be familiar with something called like cognitive behavioral therapy, it's like how I retrain my brain to think of something this way and not how it instinctively thinks about it. And just a simple example is, someone might just be able to be, they're driving to work or something, and an immodest image pops into their mind from their past, and they've been trying to fight this, and their first instinct might just be like, no, I can't think of that. When as long as it's not going to be a proximate occasion of sin, it might be worth it for such a person just like, hey, wait a second. I'm choosing not to think of it that way. I don't want to entertain a value for that sort of disordered sexuality. I want to think of it this way. I want to think of a woman as a temple of life, as someone sacred and created by God to be so, someone that I need to revere and sacrifice myself for. I want to think of, the physical reality of a woman as the reality of a motherhood, things like that. And I'm intentionally thinking about it that way. And now I move on with so instead of just running away from something, instead of just blocking something out, I used my intellect and my will to decide what I was going to do with that memory. And that did a little bit of a click back
Yeah.
as far as our mental rewiring goes.
Reformulating images.
Right. Yeah. So that's like I said, that is something that can be practiced, by oneself, whether that's just in our thoughts or even writing things out, getting a book, or even going to a therapist that, can specialize in just helping us control obsessive thoughts and things like that. Very, very doable and often recommendable if it's a serious thing. Then lastly, this is, and not to, best for last, let's say most important, we absolutely can't do it without the help of grace. So someone in such a position that they've done the defense, now they're on offense, you got to keep praying. You have to beg humbly for the grace and the strength that you don't have, that none of us have, without exception. And then to keep going to the sacraments, you go to confession as often as you need to, obviously, but more often than that, go every week, go twice a week if you can.
Okay.
Go to Holy Communion as often as you possibly can. Go to our Lord. And I say that, it might sound obvious, but someone who's in an addiction to pornography, a lot of times they're so ashamed at their state that they've concluded that our Lord doesn't actually want us to go to him. That's part of the lie. And so it's like, no, quite on the contrary, go show him your wounds, by all means, and beg for that strength that you don't, of course he wants to give it to you, and don't let shame be a block. That was the lie that the devil tried to push against Adam and Eve at the very beginning. And it's still working today, to try and hide ourselves from God in shame when he'll be the one to heal us. Okay. So that's what can I do as far as, someone who might really actually be struggling.
Yeah.
And that's a relevant thing today.
And what about then if we can go down this path, that's all very helpful for that group of people, but there are also there's another group of people who, let's say, are not in that state of addiction or not struggling, but still have to take it very seriously. So would you adjust your advice a bit then in that case?
Yeah, we'd adjust the advice for sure. So basically the general mindset that we want to have is that we both, everyone without exception, we want to have both the mindset of offense and defense still.
Okay.
So the defense is we are absolutely in a sexualized culture. It's infiltrated that mindset, like the pornographic mindset, which is basically the desacralization of sexuality, is what it comes down to. So it's something more self-based. It devalues especially what a woman is, but just love in general. That's our culture. It's absolutely everywhere. We have to realize that, and we can't be naive about styles of dress, entertainments that we use, especially just basic movies. They don't have to be explicit movies for that culture to be feeding into our own minds, and especially our children's minds who can't make the distinction. There's just some things that it might seem perfectly innocent. Come on, it's just some Disney movie about it, whatever. But what's she wearing? And and et cetera. That sort of thing we're taking for granted. So we have to be more defensive as far as that, and lest anyone accuse me of being proprietous, or what's the puritanical is the word I'm looking for.
Okay.
You can try and accuse me of being puritanical, but the problem is that you're going to have to answer yourself for the justification of any level of disordered sexuality, whether that's immodest dress or immodest music or immodest culture. My opinion and my conclusion is that I think it goes a lot farther into our various forms of entertainment and style than we'd like to admit. Both because we might find something that even a little bit attractive, it's easier, etc. And we don't want to have to fight, the kids on every level as far as movies and video games and things like that. So that's just first mindset is,
all of these things affect all of us more than we want to believe.
All of it, absolutely. And we have to be more nitpicky than we'd like to. It's mind blowing and it should be unheard of, but it's not. The music videos that our children watch, the movie stars and the music stars that that they talk about. There's absolutely no reason why any child should be watching that woman. For example, or movie or whatever it is. I guess I was thinking about this. I think you probably heard of that movie that just came out recently with Jim Caviezel, about the kids, the sex trafficking and all that. And it woke woke a lot of people up,
Yep.
right? And everyone's like, wow, this is a horrible thing. What can I do to change this?
Yep.
And what I was thinking, every time this conversation goes up is, where do these people come from? First of all, where do these predators that he's saying, there's thousands of these people all over the world, and we're fighting a losing battle. First of all, where are these people coming from? Why are there so many perverts that are actually willing to do that to a child? They were children once. Where is that mindset coming from? Well, it's probably coming from a pornographic culture. And I listened to an interview, and Caviezel even points that out, where he's saying, I've talked to people, preparing for his role, and there's different interviews of people that are in jail, sentenced for life, even for crimes against sexuality and violence and things like that. And almost without exception, they say, it started with pornography.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make here is that doesn't just start with pornography itself. It starts with, as a child, we've lost the boundaries and the barriers in our own mind to resist that temptation in the first place and run the heck away from it. Where's that coming from? Now, I would like to posit that it's if we really want to fight against, that the horrible realities portrayed in that movie, it's going to start a lot closer to home as far as, how we dress, speak, listen, play music, watch movies, all that sort of thing. If we start.
Okay.
So that's mindset. Mindset
Yeah.
is we're in the battle, and we have to be both offensive and defensive. And the offense is that we need to start looking for these things. Okay. More practically, I guess, for every individual, I think, and I mentioned this last time, as far as like kind of the rules of morality goes. Prudently speaking, there really should not be these days a smart device, a device that has access to the internet without some level of accountability or filtering or both. It doesn't make sense, and it's too naive and not enough effort to just say, well, it's impossible. You go to the weather and there's already things popping up at the bottom. Well, then there has to be a different way to check the weather, and if there's not, then we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be letting things into our head every day. And it is possible. There are basic filtering apps and things like that do block most of that stuff out. It's probably too much to say everything, but that's my point. Is that for the average person, at least someone that's not struggling with this on a daily level, or even a yearly level, or maybe ever, there still needs to be a certain level of filtering, of accountability, of surveillance, of openness, because the ideal that I'm never going to have to fight this is completely untenable. It's impossible. None of us can say that's somebody else's problem entirely, and it's never going to be mine. If you think that, you've denied your own human nature.
Okay,
is basically what it comes down to. So on the prudential level, there really shouldn't be any sort of internet device without some level of safety on it, and we'll talk about more practically later. If someone has fallen in sin, like I said last time, to this sort of thing, especially intentionally, then it simply cannot be had without sin itself, because now we're dealing with a new occasion of sin that's there. After that, I would say more just kind of on an advice level. I think it's the best route as far as the offense goes. So defense is the accountability, the safety. Let's make sure everything's safe, lock down, double check. But offensively, anyone who's fighting a battle, they're not just going to get, the enemy off the front line. If they've routed them, chase those guys and finish it, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. We need to push across the line of just the mere necessary prudence. We're the only ones that are in control of what we watch, what we take in, what we read. And if we're too sloppy with that, if we're, with just the basic improprieties and modesty of today, we're going to be responsible for the lowering of our own standards. And that's going to make us that much more liable to fall to a more serious temptation down the road. So when I say, take 3 steps farther than you need to go, maybe it's good. You got, we got some internet safety browser thing. We're good. Well, no, I mean, be a little bit more thorough than that. Let's really get on the same page. Let's completely block certain websites. Let's never have these certain apps. Let's make, rules. And I'm just saying individually, even like just rules with myself about some things I'm never going to have. I don't need it. I don't need to expose myself to that sort of temptation. It's gone forever. And I can make it even more thorough, even if I don't need to. I can go to a friend and be like, hey, I want an accountability partner. No, I'm not struggling, but I don't want to have the chance to watch YouTube. I don't want to have the chance to get TikTok. I don't want to have the chance to even get closer. So just type in a password. Don't tell me what it is. If I need to, if I have a legitimate reason to have you type it in so I can download an app later on, I'll let you know what it is and you can decide. I'm trusting. That's going 3 steps past. And how much more peace of soul and how much less sin would there be, if we kind of took those steps. Lastly, then I think as far as just, kind of like the general person goes, for parents, and again, this is something we're planning on talking about more as far as application to kids, adolescents, more particularly, but for parents, I really can't say that there's enough monitoring or vigilance. I think there's a very good conversation to be had about, the balance between exposing our children to legitimate dangers and things like that, so they can practice virtue. Pardon.
No.
But when it comes to this particular temptation, and this is something I disagree with a lot of parents, I would have to say, you can't monitor and be vigilant too much, and you almost can't wait too long. So the difference is this, is that some people say, well, they're going to get a phone, they're going to need to know how to use these things. Yes, but first of all, they certainly don't need a phone before they need it, and especially not before they're close to the end of high school. Like that's absolutely not worth doing, no matter how much they fight it. But the example I use is that we're not just talking about a car. We're not just talking about normal virtues. It's good to have to be exposed to people that are bullies or people that are using improper language and stuff, because that's going to give them the chance to practice those virtues, and sometimes they're going to fail. That's how we grow. Yeah. But when it comes to something that's completely disproportionate to their ability to regulate, for example, we don't say, kids, I don't want you to be a drug addict when you grow up, so here, take a little bit of marijuana at a time, so that you can build up a tolerance. It doesn't work like that at all. It really is the same thing. When it comes to protecting our children from pornography, you can't be too thorough when it comes to just always looking for the smallest chance that they might get. Okay, that's I think is extremely important, but that's still only that's one side of that vigilance as far as parents goes, because that's the negative side. Do everything you can to protect your children from stumbling on this. Okay. The positive side, though, is do everything you can to win the trust of your children, because the difference between a child growing up an addict because they stumbled on something, and someone that grew in virtue because they stumbled on something, is that they were able to get help for it. So a child's immediately going to be ashamed, let's say. But if they have a good, bond of trust with their mom or dad, they could say, hey, I did this, or this popped up, or whatever it is. And if the parent doesn't, completely lose their cool and scream and throw them out the window and all these things, then the child can actually be rewarded for, making that trustful statement and then helped. And that could make all the difference in the world, even if they really chose to do something, if they're able to be helped out of it at a young age, it'll change everything. So those are the two things. Again, more to be talked about in both of those realms, but I think it's worth putting. You can't make a bigger deal about those things.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to do a whole episode, now that we've zoomed in a little bit on pornography. I think we're going to zoom back out and do a whole episode on technology and children. So for parents specifically. But now that we've kind of laid the groundwork for this, maybe by way of conclusion, you can summarize this and just maybe emphasize the last point you made about this building of trust and communication with children, because that seems to be beneficial both on the front end, meaning doing it before there's this knowledge, practical knowledge of how the world is, so that once it's encountered, or once mom and dad have already told me about what to expect out here. But it also seems to be that kind of thing that if down the road, when there is inevitably a question or something is seen in the world or whatever, then you've already established the relationship, so that it's like I don't know, in theory, if everything goes well, it's the kind of thing that just keeps
building.
Once you've earned the trust, you keep building it, right?
On it, yeah.
So anyway, by way of, let's say, conclusion and preparation for this this next episode on technology and children for parents, how would you summarize this?
And maybe we could say that it's sort of a summary of the whole next episode, and a good conclusion, I guess, would be, on the one hand, the defense aspect for our children is as much vigilance and monitoring and things like that as possible, but that includes something we're going to have to address very concretely. That includes our own use of technology. So a parent that is not careful with their own, let's say, digital technology, even if it's not on explicit material, they can't expect one slight level better, or even equal from their children. So if parents are willing to take this question very seriously in their own lives, what they watch, what they listen to, how they use their devices, then they're going to be able to that much more reasonably and effectively say, in our house, we will not leave loaded guns in the living room in any possible way. Like, everything will be locked down. It'll be in public spaces. It'll be, as safe as can possibly be, because we're not risking this, and mom and dad are both on the same page, and they're very much on the same page with their older kids. That's the defense part. Okay. Well, we'll go through details and examples and things. On the offense part, the positive aspect is that's the trust thing. And like you said, it involves both a current moment thing, but also a preparation. So children certainly need to know, especially today, that, they need to have a certain amount of knowledge about these things one way or another before they have to experience them themselves. It's much better that they have a vague idea of, like, okay, dad said that, when we're, I don't know, like, for example, you could be taking the kids to Virginia Beach or something, on vacation, and, you did the work as the dad, we're going to a good place, it's not a lot of people and things like that, but chances are, there's going to be people walking around not dressed well at all. Doesn't mean that you can't ever go on vacation, but that would be an excellent opportunity, preparation wise, for a dad to take his sons aside and say, look, son, there's probably going to be girls who are not going to be dressed well. Here's how we should think about it as Catholic men. I just want you to kind of expect this, and then afterwards, we could talk about it again. And that's going to take this huge weight off of that son. It's the same thing even when it comes to use of technology or whatever it is. There has to be some level of knowledge proportionate to that child's ability to understand, with a very clear idea of, I can talk to mom or dad about this and I won't be in trouble for it. Yeah. Because that's huge. And then if it comes about, for example, that Protect Young Eyes website I mentioned last time, they have sort of a mantra for their kids, but I mean, I don't necessarily agree with how much they might say kids can use technology for, innocent games and things like that. But regardless, their kind of mantra is, if something pops up, put it down, tell someone, put it down, tell someone, put it down, tell someone, because and they just tell it to their kids all the time. And so that way, if something happens, the kid comes up, hey, mom, this popped up on the screen. And I think they give a very good advice, which is, if your child comes and tells you that, the first thing you do is thank them. You want them to have the feeling of, I did the right thing and I can do that again. I can go to mom or dad and I can tell them, hey, this happened, or I'm struggling with this, or what does this mean, or whatever it is. And especially if they've been given a little bit of a clue ahead of time, son, you might have to experience this. You might, or, in talking to the daughter, you're going to have to prepare for this. Okay. Since they already know that mom and dad are willing to talk about it enough to bring it up with me, I can trust them to go back and talk to them about it and not be afraid of being in trouble. And then, like you said, that just continues to build with questions that they ask as they get older, as what, just what they'll be exposed to in the world. But to keep a very positive light in that, and to be, just be calm and never lie. I think of the two things, because a lot of parents are, what on earth do I say? Well, we'll talk about that as well. But already we could say, every way you can, build trust on this, build confidence. And then lastly, my last thing with all of that is, don't expect them to do it first. They won't. Absolutely. Would you when you were a child? No, I wouldn't, for sure. But, and they won't either. And so the parents have to be, this is part of the deal. You got to take the first step. But if you do, that's how you will, create that foundation of trust, because they're going to see that. So
very good.
So that's I think the summary and the preview, and then we'll get into the particulars.
All right. Thanks so much, Father.
Sure thing.
Next episode soon.